I'm glad you're noticing all these things. Not everybody noticed these things. We put a lot of work and effort into this, but sometimes you put a lot of work and effort into things, and folks don't always notice it. But I'm glad you picked up on it.
Get your evaluation right up. People are like, "Oh no!" And then if I say, "Well, do it the old-fashioned way," no.
Moving from Google Sheets within something that was more Google-centric to something that was not only robust, but also could be still compliant with the HIPAA side.
Information from the formulas, and then I use Google Slides. I should be a Google spokesperson.
And availability that you could have available to occupational therapists outside of your immediate business. Talk us through that little journey when you're like, okay, this works, it keeps breaking. How did I get over this?
Create a better system that will, first of all, make it so all of our evaluations look more similar to each other.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode. My name is Nike Roach. I am the Chief Business Development Officer here at Solutions Afoot, and I get to talk with not only clients, but I also get to talk with customers, success stories, and really give you an idea of what it's like to be on the other side of this. I get the honor of talking with Stephanie Wick, and she's going to tell you a little bit more of her story, what started the journey, and then we'll go from there. Hey, Stephanie.
Hello. Good morning, afternoon.
Good evening. I always say that because you never know when somebody's going to be looking at it.
That is true.
It could be 3 o'clock in the morning. Go ahead and for the audience, because they don't know your backstory, just quickly tell us a little bit more about you and your journey.
Okay, so I am an occupational therapist. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and I'm also the owner of Learning Charms. This is a pediatric OT business, and I employ about anywhere between 25 to 35 therapists on any given year. We work only in North Carolina, but throughout North Carolina. And I've been doing this since 1998, so people can quickly figure out my age. So I've been doing it for a long time. We bill insurance groups as mostly North Carolina Medicaid. And so because of that, our documentation has to be spot on. We get audited all the time, and they can even try to take back money even when we've done everything correctly. Part of the pain that began for me as being president of my group and everything is paperwork. When people come into being an occupational therapist or an OT assistant, whichever it is, they have various degrees of backgrounds and experience. And so I may get a new grad, or I may get someone who has 30 years of experience. But either way, our documentation has to be compliant, and all users have different skill levels. They may be a great therapist, but terrible with documentation. They may be good at both or somewhere in the middle. But new grads often have a hard time with documentation because, they're learning, they're new. And so I was finding that we were not as productive as we needed to be with our documentation, especially with our evaluations, because of this. And I was doing a lot of training, but yet there was just a lot of variability in the output, and we were kind of getting spanked on some of our audits because maybe the information that should have been there wasn't there, or there may have been errors in evaluations, such as like the pronouns may have been switched because sometimes we were using templates, and so it was a he, but they put she. And that was enough to make the auditors be like, well, I don't really know if this was about the person you said it was about. And then they would basically take back hundreds or thousands of dollars. Occupational therapy is a pretty lean area as far as our fee schedule. So the money that we receive back from Medicaid is the same now as it was when I started in my practice in 1998. It also tells you that there is a shortage of occupational therapists because people like to get paid a living wage. And right now it's really tough for that to happen. So I started thinking about, how can I create a better system that will, first of all, make it so all of our evaluations look more similar to each other. And then also, how can I make it so the system, the evaluation, not only the time that we sit down with a child is quicker, but also that write-up, because we have to sit down with the child and compose the evaluation, get all these skill areas and their milestones and blah, blah, blah. But then we have to sit down later and we have to write it up into something that looks like a medical necessity type of argument, if that's the case. So I've always liked technology, but I started working with Google Forms, and then I would basically had created a form that had all the questions that we needed to ask a child. And ours was a little easier because at that time we were working mostly with an age range of between 3 and 6 years old. So it was a little easier to do that. And the form went to a spreadsheet, and then I created formulas on the spreadsheet. And then from there, I created a Google Doc that basically used markers to plug in the information from the formulas. And then I used Google Slides. I should be a Google spokesperson. I used Google Slides to kind of create the template. So when a therapist was asking the questions, it'd kind of like take you through a presentation. Okay, this is the next question. This is how you ask it. So it's sort of standardizing the way we were doing things. But in order to make all of those systems play together, I had to use a lot of Google extensions, and they would break. That's when we started doing this, and then I created an automated generated document. So once the therapist hit submit, that write-up was available, and it was beautiful. And people who had been doing that for a long time, the old way versus the new way, were like, oh my gosh, this is great. Like, I just brought my evaluations from the write-up taking an hour to, no time at all. But anyway, what would happen is, I say we've been doing this 3 years. So we've done this with about 4,700 evaluations at this point. So it's a lot. I have a lot of data. But what would happen, especially during the times when we were really heavy with doing these evaluations, something would break. And then no one was getting that little email that said, here's your, link to get your evaluation right up. People were like, oh no, what? And then if I said, well, do it the old fashioned way, no, we can't do that. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have created monsters here. Like, we are so, but it was, to go from the old way to the new way, and then back to the old way, was not something that people wanted to do. But I was spending a lot of my time, my new time that I had, going back and fixing formulas and trying to figure out why the extensions had somehow broken. And I was like, this would be great to have a real, create something real, like a development project where things wouldn't break, and our data could be kept. Our data is HIPAA. We have the HIPAA-compliant version of Google, but yet that still makes me a little nervous. So that was the pain. I created a kind of a prototype, but because it kept breaking and I wanted to do more, I was like, oh, that'd be great if it do this and that. And there's limits, but there's also limits with me. Like, I don't know how to go to the next step with a lot of that. So when that happened, I started really searching with how could I create this into a real application that not only for my therapy group, but I'm like, if this is saving us so much time, surely there's other occupational therapists out there who serve pediatrics who would purchase this from me. So that's how we began.
So in your search for a solution, how did you pop up on Solutions Afoot? I mean, take us through that journey, that moving from the Google Sheets within something that was more Google centric to something that was not only robust, but also could be still compliant with the HIPAA side, but then availability that you could have available to occupational therapists outside of your immediate business. Talk us through that little journey when you like, okay, this works, it keeps breaking. How did I get over to Solutions?
Yeah, so I started searching just some different, at first I was like, I'm just going to do this myself. And so I started, read about low code, which is pretty much, I was doing like really low code. And so I started looking at sort of low code and found a lot of different places that offered it, but the price point was just crazy, right? So first of all, I was looking for sort of a database, like what would support something like this. And so I went with a developer for a while, and it was a good start, but it just wasn't the right fit. And so I noticed that on that site that there was like partners. And that's when I reached out to you all, reached out to someone else as well, but I just felt like there was a better fit with Learning Charms and Solutions Afoot. And that's sort of how I found you all, was through the Caspio developer partner
Portal.
report.
Exactly. So how was it? And it's convenient that, we're in drive distance from you. So many of the partners are not centric to North Carolina, but since we're, in North Carolina, you're not very far. It's different in California where you're pretty distant.
It was part of my problem before, not the only problem with the other development team, is that there was never a time during my work day when it was their work day. It was completely different. And so we spent half of the year just kind of, waiting for an email to be returned. So when I would be awake and return the email, they were asleep. And it just, that doesn't work for someone like me who wants to get moving on pretty quickly. And so quickly, when I found out that we were in the same state, that was, you all are my people. And even if I was in California and you all are where you are, I would still choose you all to work with. But just that our time zone is the same or very similar, that has been amazing. But also, the development team that you all set me up with, they, at least Miles anyway, he had a background similar to mine before he went to development. So he already kind of knew what OT was. I spent a lot of time explaining what occupational therapy is. And for someone to already be like, oh yeah, I know about that. I worked with one before, or, my wife is a school psychologist. I was like, oh, man, we just saved 2 hours right there.
Project discovery, just understanding what your particular industry, was very helpful to have an assigned project leader to understand not only coding, not only understanding the time zone or time difference, because a lot of development teams are many hours in many countries away, but also, I think, to your point, having someone who understands therapy. And I come from the massage therapy side. Other people come from the psychotherapy, OT, physical therapy. So we are familiar with various models to be able to provide patient care, but also to be able to provide good, secure data that applies. So moving past that, now what's the solution? Now what can you do? Now that you've kind of gone through the process, at least the initial part of it, to get everything. And I know we still got some other stuff to work on, but talk me through what's been the revelation since Solutions Afoot got on board.
Well, we're not, we have one login and we're not having like a lot of other stuff on the side. And, so that's been really good. We are just still testing it. So it's not out for, I guess it's a soft launch, and, we're looking at that. And of course, my problem is every time the Miles or Luke, who's my, main developer, is like, what if, I definitely have an entrepreneur brain. I'm always like, what could we do? Could we do this? The more that and they keep saying, yes, we can do that. And they create a solution, or they're like, well, that might be kind of development intensive. Would you rather do that? Or how about this? We sort of work together as a team, and that's been great because we're creating more things that I thought that things that I didn't think we would really be doing. But so anyway, the system, the app that we have now, is creating formulas that I wasn't able to do before, that's capturing like a child's chronological age, and formulas that are basically capturing, okay, well, this is the chronological age for this skill should be mastered. So what's the percentage of where the child actually is right now on that? So we're really getting good quality data that will be used. Actually working with another group, like a metric group, that's planning on, we're going to standardize as much of this as possible, so that way we can start establishing updated developmental norms for pediatrics, which is really good because a lot of the standardized assessments out there that professionals like me use are 20 years old, and we know that that's not an established, updated norm. So yeah, so we're doing that. I don't know. It's pretty amazing. Like sometimes I forget how far we've gone, because overall, I think this has been in development 3 years, and that's including when I first started with the other group. So maybe it's been two years, a little over 2 years, I guess.
Gotcha. So it sounds like based on that, you have a unique partnership, if you will, where you're like, okay, I feel comfortable. Can we do this? Can we do that? And then building a more robust process than you originally even thought of, and having, team members like Miles and Luke who are familiar with certain things and saying, okay, let's see if we can capture this data, which will make your application that more attractive to OTs or other therapists for that matter, being able to understand that, wow, I didn't know I could do that. And then saying, yeah, that's something we can do. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing I was thinking about before we had this meeting today, I was kind of, sketching out some things that I really liked just about working with Solutions Afoot. And one of them was kind of the process. And I don't know if you all do this with everyone, but all I have to compare it to is kind of how the process worked before with the other development group. And I would have to meet only with the project manager. And then they would do something like they would sketch out like this, what they would call the sprints. And so I would have to pay for like 7 to 10 hours for them to kind of figure out what the sprints were. And I never got to actually talk to the developers. And I don't actually know, there may have been such an English language, there may have been a language barrier there that may have been part of it, but I love the way I don't talk to a project manager with you guys. I talk directly to the developers that are working on this. And I talked to Josh a lot too, and he's not directly developing. I talk to you. Everyone's so available to be able to talk to. And if Luke or Miles don't know the answer, if it doesn't fall within their scope, then they find the person that does, and we all meet. You all are just very, very approachable, and I feel like I'm able to get right to the source of the information quickly without, kind of languishing on like, oh, well, let me see, So I love that.
That is one of our unique positions, and you're right. Most of us have worked with other development teams, and the way you've described it is a pain point for professionals, because you do rarely talk to the developer themselves. You talk to the project manager, and you don't get to, because there's some nuances that the developer knows that he or she can help you with. And if they don't know, like you said, we can always, reach out to other team members who that is their expertise. So that's how we operate within Solutions Afoot, is really making sure that we stay organic to the project, and knowing that certain parts of the team are not needed every day. They only needed to pull in for a specific issue or specific look or feel or field or something like that. And then they go back to other projects and stuff like that. So yeah, that's I'm glad you noticed that. A lot of people don't notice that up front, but yes. Yeah, I'm glad you did notice that.
I think that Miles, like I'll keep saying Miles and Luke too, they are very easy to talk to. Like sometimes when we're meeting together, they start like I feel so, they could be a neighbor to mine. I'm able to talk to them on a regular wavelength. And even though they know their development stuff, like sometimes I start thinking, I think I really am getting this. And then they start chattering a little bit about this and codes and HTML. And then I realize no, they were just nice people that can talk to me on my level, about make it understandable for me.
That is another. So when we look for team members, we look for that. We're looking for folks who are not only great coders, great developers, but great people. So right. That, you can have great developers, and I'm not knocking any great developers, but you have to have some of those skills, personable, being able to interact and to relate to the person in front of you, because as you said, the other team, it wasn't relatable. And sometimes there was a cultural barrier. Sometimes there was a time barrier, and sometimes you just didn't get to the person who was actually doing it. They were just assigned, and then you'd have to pay for the sprints, like you said, while they're trying to figure it out. Whereas it's more organic. Let's work through it. And then that's how we work through the process. So yeah. I'm glad you're noticing all these things. Not everybody noticed these things. It's like we put a lot of work and effort into this, but sometimes you put a lot of work and effort into things, and folks don't always notice it. But I'm glad you picked up on it. So if you were talking to someone else, in not a competitor, somebody else who was a colleague in say another profession or something like that, in say a quick minute to 30 seconds, how would you tell them about Solutions Afoot?
Oh, let's see. Well, I would just tell them if they're considering a project, like a development project, they definitely need to call and first of all, make contact with you. And I would just say if they're looking for a group that can really kind of handhold their needs when they need it. But, I feel like you all can produce at all levels. You can work with people who don't really have a clue, like that was me before, of what they're doing, but just kind of want to talk through things. You all can do it. Or if you're a developer, maybe that has some experience, but can't do the work on their own. You all, I mean, I feel like you all can manage all different levels of needs. So I would just say to, definitely to reach out to you all. And I'm pretty sure that the first time we talked, there was no commitment, and you all didn't charge me for, I think we had an hour meeting, and maybe it was with you or maybe you and Josh later. Just call and see what you do, but have an idea of what you do, so that way you all can make some assumptions from there. I don't know if that's really what you're asking, but
that is precisely what I was asking. So, Stephanie, I really appreciate you taking time. I know you got a lot of other projects, and you have some four-legged family members floating around, so do I, who are probably scratching at the door. Mine is floating around my house. But I do appreciate the time. It's been an honor to talk with you, and a privilege to have you as part of our Solutions Afoot ecosystem. And we look forward to continuing to develop good products, good service, and good partnerships in projects now and in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to working with you again in the future.
You are welcome. You're welcome.